You've found Nightfall Murmurs. When day fades into silence, the world begins to whisper. Some stories come as murmurs, some as warnings, but they all come at night. Don't be afraid to listen, but never listen alone. My constitution isn't easily shaken, but a profound sense of the discordance settled upon me the very first night I spent within the walls of my new residence. Nearly a year I'd scrimped, hoarding funds to escape the confines of a shoebox studio. I craved expanse, a neighborhood less gray, the tangible feel of ascent in my own life. Securing the lease for this second-floor dwelling had filled me with a quiet, hard-won pride. It felt like finally cresting a long hill. The building itself was vintage, undeniably so, yet possessed a certain gravity, an architectural charm. Corridors stretched wide beneath lofty ceilings, floors laid with genuine timber. This antique character had appealed during the initial walkthrough, though even then, a subterranean current of awareness registered a faint, persistent aroma. Old pigment, perhaps, or the dry breath of settled dust. An acceptable quirk, I'd reasoned, for a structure with history etched into its bones. That inaugural night, fatigue from the move dragged me under swiftly. Cartons stood sentinel in every corner. The bed frame remained disassembled. My mattress lay sprawled on the floorboards or a makeshift nest of blankets where I collapsed. Consciousness returned abruptly, the clock face glowing near 3:00 a.m. Darkness held sway, thick and silent. Nothing seemed overtly amiss. I rolled, seeking the oblivion of sleep once more. But then it came, a sound from the corridor just beyond my door. Footfalls, heavy, resonant, as if produced by thick-soled boots. Their rhythm was unnervingly steady, a cadence less like walking and more like a measured patrol. Thump, 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 thump. I pushed myself upright, ears straining against the quiet. The pace was slow, deliberate, utterly unlike the hurried scuffles or shuffling gaits common to apartment hallways. These impacts were firm, each one landing with distinct weight. A neighbor with an eccentric schedule? Perhaps. A security patrol? Unlikely. I'd seen no guard, only the absentee landlord residing across town. And the duration? It stretched unnaturally long. The sound didn't recede as someone traversing the hall. It seemed locked in a loop, pacing back and forth directly outside. Sliding from the mattress, I crept to the door, pressing my eye to the fisheye lens of the peephole. The cheap overhead fixture cast its perpetual sickly glow down the empty expanse. No one. I held my breath, pulse hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The corridor remained vacant, yet the thump-thump persisted, impossibly close. Pressing my ear to the wood, the sound was terrifyingly real, immediate, as though the source stood mere inches away. The peephole stubbornly revealed only emptiness. Dismiss it, I told myself. Grogginess, phantom acoustics from the building's aging viscera. I secured the deadbolt, turned the knob lock until it clicked firmly, and retreated to my mattress. After a tense interval, the footsteps ceased. An hour or more I lay vigilant, listening intently, before exhaustion finally claimed me again. Morning brought a self-deprecating chuckle. Overtired, my mind conjuring phantoms. The day was consumed by the ritual of unpacking, assembling the sofa, connecting the television, arranging crockery in the kitchen cabinets. I actively pushed the memory of the nocturnal rhythm away. The second night found me awake late, bathed in the television's flickering glow. Furniture arrangement was ongoing. Boxes still littered the periphery, but the living room had achieved a semblance of order, comfortable enough for relaxation. Around midnight, I switched off the set, deciding on a quick shower before turning in. The bathroom branched off a short passage leading from my bedroom. As I opened the bedroom door, my gaze caught on the light seeping under the threshold of my apartment's main entrance. It pulsed, rhythmically dimming and brightening, as if obstructed by a passing form. A neighbor heading home, perhaps. But the shadow lingered, pausing directly before my door, its occultation of the light too slow, too intentional. Unease prickled my skin. I stood frozen, hands still clasping the bedroom doorknob, waiting for the silhouette to proceed. It remained stubbornly fixed. Cautiously, I approached the main door, heart thudding, palms slick with sudden perspiration. I am a grown man, yet something about that intermittent darkness radiated pure menace. My fingers reached for the chain lock, a reflexive check of its security. Without warning, the doorknob on my side rattled violently. It twisted with sharp, forceful intent, as if someone on the exterior was attempting entry. I snatched my hand back, a gasp catching in my throat. For a paralyzed second, I simply stared. Then, instinct took over. I grasped the knob, resisting its counter-torque. It strained against my grip. A silent, powerful wrestling match. No sound accompanied the assault. No breathing, no voice, just brute force applied to the mechanism. After several taut seconds, the pressure ceased. I remained rooted, mind racing. Another glance through the peephole. Nothing. The hallway stretched vacant, the light beneath the door now steady, unwavering. A tightness constricted my chest, but I forced the thought. A prank, surely. Some juvenile foolishness. I tried to regulate my breathing, reminding myself of the solid wood and steel between me and the empty corridor. Sleep proved elusive that night. Every creak of the old building, every sigh of the pipes, sent jolts of adrenaline through me. I drifted into a shallow, fitful doze, sometime in the desolate hours around 3 or 4. Upon waking the following day, I discovered a bruise blooming on my left forearm, a deep violet mark, vaguely circular, with faint finger-like suggestions radiating from its edge. Prodding it elicited a sharp ache. It made no sense. I had no recollection of impact, no memory of striking my arm against anything. I mentally reviewed the previous day's exertions, hoisting heavy boxes, maneuvering furniture, but nothing correlated. The apartment remained cluttered, true. Perhaps I'd clipped a table corner unnoticed. I dismissed it as a random contusion, an anomaly. That night, the strangeness deepened. I was reclining in bed, scrolling absently on my phone. The apartment's internal hallway light was off, but the ubiquitous glow from the main corridor still infiltrated beneath the front door. Around 1 a.m., the footsteps resumed. That same ponderous, deliberate cadence echoed from the hallway. I sat bolt upright, phone clutched tight, eyes fixed on my bedroom door, half expecting the knob to begin its spectral rotation once more. My heart rate surged, my mouth turned instantly dry. I waited, scarcely breathing. This time the footfalls drew nearer, past my door, continued down the corridor, seemed to reach the end, and then reversed direction. Each time they approached, I held my breath, skin prickling with a hot, nervous tension. A primal urge screamed at me to fling open the door, to confront the source, but a deeper terror restrained me, whispering of what horrors might await in that illuminated emptiness. After perhaps 10 minutes of this relentless back and forth pacing, a single, solid thump resonated against my door. Not the sharp crack of a kick, but a firm, deliberate impact, like a heavy fist or some object striking the wood. Slowly, silently, I eased off the bed and padded towards the entrance. I pressed again to the peephole, and again, nothing. The hallway lay bare under the sallow light. No person, no movement, no shadow. I laid my palm flat against the door's surface. It felt cool, and yet I fancied I detected a faint residual vibration, an almost imperceptible tremor, as if the wood still hummed from the recent blow. It sounds preposterous, I know, but the sensation was distinct. For a long while, I remained there, peering out, until finally I whispered into the silence, "No one's there." I returned to bed but found no real rest. Huddled beneath the blankets, ears straining, I listened until the footsteps eventually faded. Sheer mental exhaustion must have pulled me under near dawn. Morning inspection of the hallway revealed nothing unusual. The overhead light shone steadily. The corridor was deserted, devoid of scuff marks or any trace of nocturnal passage. A pervasive unease shadowed me throughout the day. My appetite vanished. I kept examining the bruise on my forearm. It was darkening, deepening in color. I resolved to speak with a neighbor, but the adjacent apartment seemed unnervingly quiet, possibly unoccupied. Around noon, I knocked on the door next to mine. No response. I tried again, rapping more firmly, then waited a full minute, listening. Silence emanated from within. The prospect of canvassing the entire building, knocking on unfamiliar doors, felt intrusive and futile, so I abandoned the effort. The ensuing nights fell into a grim pattern. Sometime after midnight, the steady, boot-like stomp would commence in the hallway. Sometimes it passed only once. Other nights, it lingered, pacing endlessly. I developed a ritual, extinguishing every light within my apartment. I would sit in the oppressive darkness, simply listening. My mind existed in a state of hypervigilance. The footsteps would begin, my breathing would quicken, and I'd battle the childish impulse to retreat to the closet. Instead, I remained seated, wide-eyed, phone clutched in my hand, poised to dial for help should the unseen presence escalate its intrusion. Yet I never laid eyes on anyone. Occasionally, a shadow would eclipse the light beneath the door. Sometimes the knob would jiggle tentatively. The feeling of presence was undeniable, overwhelming, but the peephole consistently offered only vacancy. One night I altered my strategy. Lights off, I positioned myself in the living room, phone camera activated, aimed squarely at the front door. Perched on a chair, leaning forward, I waited, determined to capture tangible proof. The footsteps commenced around 1:30 a.m., slow, metronomic. My pulse thundered in my ears, a frantic counterpoint to the deliberate rhythm outside. I watched the door intently. At one point, the faint silhouette of a form materialized beneath the door, blocking the corridor light. The doorknob rattled again, briefly but sharply. I zoomed the camera slightly, but the low light yielded only a murky, indistinct blur, a dark shape, devoid of detail. Then it shifted, moved away, the courage to wrench open the door and face whatever lurked there failed me utterly. Weeks bled into one another under this siege. The nights became dreaded territories. I began retiring earlier, hoping sleep might provide immunity, a shield against the sounds. Invariably, I'd awaken around the same hour, that familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. Some nights brought only the pacing, others featured a soft knock, or the doorknob turning a few degrees back and forth. New bruises appeared, one on my thigh, another near my shoulder blade. Each time they surfaced in locations inexplicable by normal activity, roundish contusions tender to the touch. The chilling thought began to take root. Was something interacting with me physically while I slept, leaving these marks without waking me fully? I had no memory, only the painful evidence. I lodged a complaint with the building manager. He listened with a carefully neutral expression, then informed me that no other residents had reported similar disturbances. His gaze held a flicker of concern, but it was the kind reserved for the potentially overwrought or imaginative. He visited one afternoon, inspected my door, tested the locks, and offered a non-committal shrug. Everything appeared sound, he declared. I could sense his unspoken diagnosis: stress, perhaps paranoia. My frustration mounted. I yearned for proof, but my audio recordings captured only silence punctuated by faint thuds, devoid of any visual corroboration. Moving out became a recurring thought, yet the financial drain of securing this place tethered me here. Besides, where would I go? A stubborn refusal also took hold. Why should I surrender my hard-won space to some inexplicable phenomenon? So, I remained. I adapted, fortified my defenses. Additional locks were purchased and installed, a heavy-duty chain, another sliding bolt. Sometimes I slept with earplugs or headphones emitting white noise. This muted the footsteps, but did nothing to prevent the bruises. I still woke periodically, discovering new tender spots, new inexplicable marks on my skin. Last night marked a new nadir. I retired around midnight, having meticulously verified each lock. In the blackest hours, I surfaced from sleep, not gradually, but plunged into a state of profound dread before my eyes even opened. When they did, I registered that I was lying on my side, facing my bedroom door. It stood ajar, gaping into the dimness, though I distinctly remembered securing it. Framed in the opening stood a shape, not solid, not entirely defined, yet substantial enough to obscure much of the faint ambient light trickling in from the living room beyond. I froze, utterly immobile. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. My mouth was dust. My breaths came in shallow, useless gasps. I tried to command my limbs, but they felt leaden, unresponsive. I managed to blink, a single, convulsive movement. In that instant, the shape seemed to recoil, gliding backward, vanishing around the corner into the short hallway. A surge of pure adrenaline broke the paralysis. I scrambled from the bed, lunged for the doorframe, slapped the bedroom light switch, then the living room's. Blazing illumination flooded empty space. No one. The front door remained secured. The deadbolt was thrown, the chain firmly seated in its track. I stood there trembling, arms rigid at my sides, the adrenaline slowly ebbing, leaving behind a residue of raw terror. And that brings me to this moment. I sit here in the living room, every light ablaze, nerves frayed to the breaking point. My body aches with chronic fatigue, and the bruise on my forearm throbs persistently, a discolored reminder still healing. Compulsively, I check the peephole, scanning the empty, silent corridor. For now, quiet reigns. What recourse do I have? One part of me screams to pack, to flee, regardless of cost or consequence. Another, more rational part, grasps at straws. Sleepwalking. An elaborate, cruel prank by an unseen neighbor. Yet the bruises are real. The rhythmic marching is real. The memory of that open door, that fleeting figure, is searingly real. Right now, my only goal is to endure until sunrise without hearing that locked door creak open again, without the prelude of those slow, methodical bootsteps resuming their patrol in the hallway just outside. I am exhausted, utterly drained, yet the thought of lying down, of closing my eyes, is impossible. I listen, perpetually listen, anticipating the return of the thumping any second now, and I harbor a chilling certainty that my capacity to withstand this is rapidly diminishing. A prickle, cold and insistent, traced my arms the instant I stepped onto the farmstead. Its sign, a relic bleached by sun and time, stood sentinel over a gravel lot empty save for my rented sedan. Near the main house's threshold, a caretaker consulted his watch, propped against a peeling post. At first glance, the place offered only mundane decay, paint curling from clapboards, a porch sagging with weary resignation, a fractured wind vane listing atop the roof. Yet, an intangible dissonance hummed beneath the surface. 2 hours I'd driven, lured by whispers of uncanny sightings, never truly believing anything could burrow under my skin. I was mistaken. I approached the caretaker, extending a hand. His grip was firm, but his gaze distant, preoccupied. Tours continued, he explained, despite the property's slow surrender to entropy. Past owners, he murmured, had weathered successive waves of misfortune. Hardships? I prompted. He offered a non-committal shrug. Sickness, fires, the slow erosion of familial bonds under immense strain. Details would have to wait. He deflected, gesturing towards the main house where the formal tour awaited. Perhaps 10 souls convened in the entrance hall, dwarfed by walls papered with sepia portraits, stern visages from a bygone era staring down from their frames. We trailed another guide, a woman whose voice held no room for theatrics, through chambers choked with dust-shrouded furniture. Velvet ropes barred access to sections where floorboards groaned a warning against collective weight. I became acutely aware of the silence, a heavy blanket that smothered even our shuffled steps and hushed queries. No birdsong pierced the stillness, no draft sighed through the warped window frames. The house felt sealed, hermetic, as if holding its breath, ready to inhale us whole. The guide recounted calamities, harvests decimated by freak storms, a barn consumed by flame, whispers of crippling debt. Eventually, abandonment claimed the farm, until distant heirs saw potential in its haunted reputation and reopened it to the curious. Some claimed to hear voices after dark, she noted flatly, or glimpse shadows flickering in upper windows long after the gates were locked. I nearly scoffed, standard fare for such places. But her unwavering tone, the utter lack of sensationalism arrested me. She spoke like someone reporting facts, not spinning yarns. Emerging from the house's oppressive embrace, we crossed the yard to a smaller outbuilding, once a workshop or repository. Rusted implements clung to the walls, artifacts of forgotten labor. The guide pointed out originals, relics from the farm's working days. It was around the time this structure rose, she intimated, that the family's troubles deepened, hinting at frayed nerves and nights devoid of sleep. No deaths were explicitly mentioned, yet the narrative painted a crushing weight of despair, enough to fracture lives. Afterward, the small assembly dispersed, some drifting across the grounds independently. I lingered, seeking out the second guide again. Were there specific phenomena reported consistently? She hesitated, eyes flicking towards the fields. Sometimes, she conceded, visitors speak of a woman walking the property after dusk, dressed in white or something pale. They say she appears troubled, but it's nothing verified. Pressed further, she admitted the tales circulated among staff, relayed by unnerved guests. Some even claimed to hear her calling out, a searching sound lost on the wind. A faint, almost embarrassed smile touched her lips before she excused herself to rejoin the others. For another hour, I wandered the open spaces alone, circling the gaunt barn, peering into dilapidated sheds, tracing the edges of fallow fields. Late afternoon light thickened into haze. The air grew heavy, clinging damply to my skin. With every turn around a blind corner, a part of me braced to find someone standing there, watching, but only the crunch of gravel underfoot and the dry rustle of leaves along a fence line broke the quiet. As 5 o'clock approached, the farm began to shutter itself, the finality of locking gates echoing in the stillness. I found lodging a mile down the road, a modest inn named Country Rest, marked by a simple wooden sign. After parking, I carried my bag to the front desk, where a taciturn woman exchanged a key for my details with minimal fuss. My second-floor room overlooked a dense stand of trees separating the inn from an unseen field. I unpacked, sought a quick meal at a nearby diner, but the farm lingered in my thoughts. The guide's understated chronicle of woes played on repeat. Could such intense suffering leave an imprint, a residue staining the land itself? Theories of place memory surfaced, but I dismissed them as the usual conflation of local lore and tourist bait. Darkness had fully descended by my return. Sleep beckoned, a necessary balm before revisiting the farm at dawn. Yet near midnight, a peculiar sensation pulled me from slumber. Nothing definite, just a feeling of being observed. Lying inert, staring at the textured ceiling, I listened to the air conditioner's low drone. Then, distinct through the quiet hum, a sound coalesced. My name, spoken softly. "Hey, are you there?" My pulse leaped, a frantic bird against my ribs. Palms grew instantly slick. Pushing myself up, I crept to the window. The night outside was an inkwell spill. A single exterior light cast a feeble circle near the driveway, but the trees and the field beyond remained impenetrable voids. Pressing my face close to the cool glass, I strained to pierce the gloom. The voice whispered again, fainter now, yet unmistakably directed at me. No one was visible. A knot tightened in my stomach. Adrenaline surged, hot and sharp. My hands trembled, my breath hitched. Edging the window open a few inches, I felt a cool draft kiss my face. Then, a whisper, seemingly closer, yet still sourceless. My eyes caught movement. A flicker of white near the ragged edge where trees met darkness. Not a trick of light, but something solid, pale fabric moving against the black. I froze, caught between calling out and shrinking back. "Hello?" The word emerged thin, unsteady. "Is someone there?" Silence answered, punctuated only by the faint shiver of leaves. Seconds later, the movement resolved. The figure drifted nearer the weak illumination cast by the inn sign. It took the shape of a woman in a long, pale dress. Her head turned, a slow, searching gesture. My heart hammered. My mouth felt coated in dust. Blinking hard, I fought the urge to dismiss it as a waking dream. She seemed to look towards my window. Her features remained indistinct, mere suggestions in the dimness, but her posture screamed anxiety, a desperate tension in her shoulders. She seemed poised to plead for aid. I remained locked in silence, knuckles white where I gripped the sill. Then, as slowly as she appeared, she turned, retreated into the deeper shadows, and vanished behind the trees. Utter stillness reclaimed the field. I stood rooted, waiting, heart pounding a deafening rhythm in my ears. Minutes stretched. Should I run down, investigate? Could it be a real person in distress? Yet her appearance had been too spectral, too silent, too sudden. Hesitation warred with concern. Finally, grabbing a flashlight from my car, I ventured downstairs and around the back of the inn. Gravel crunched loudly underfoot. My pulse throbbed in my neck. The trees loomed, their darkness absolute. The flashlight beam sliced through the night, revealing nothing but bark and leaves. "Hello?" My voice sounded small, swallowed by the expanse. After several minutes of fruitless searching, a chill unrelated to the night air settled over me. The feeling of being watched intensified. Defeated, I retreated to my room, double-locking the door. Sleep was impossible. I sat on the edge of the bed, the disembodied voice echoing relentlessly in my mind, until the first hints of dawn finally bled through the curtains around 3, silencing the buzzing alarm on my phone before it could fully register. Rest had eluded me. My eyes felt gritty, muscles taut. Downstairs, the innkeeper inquired about my sleep. I offered a vague nod, unwilling to share the night's unnerving visitation. Driving back to the farm, the morning air felt crisper, a faint breeze stirring. The same caretaker from the previous day recognized me with a wave. As we walked towards the rear of the main house, I asked him directly, had other guests mentioned seeing a woman in white, perhaps near the inn, beyond the farm's boundaries? He paused, his gaze thoughtful, then gave a slow nod. Yes, a few reports surfaced sporadically, voices heard in the fields at night, glimpses of a figure in light clothing, always appearing distraught or lost. Locals were sometimes blamed, wanderers perhaps, but nothing was ever confirmed. Others dismissed it as imagination, fueled by the farm's grim history. Yet, he admitted, the consistency across unrelated accounts was striking. He hadn't witnessed it himself, but he'd heard enough to lend the story's credence. A strange mix of validation and unease washed over me. I recounted my own experience, the voice that seemed to know my name, the figure by the trees. He questioned whether I was certain about the name. Honestly? No, not absolutely. It was muffled, indistinct. Perhaps my sleep-addled brain supplying the familiarity. But the figure, the woman outside my window, that was undeniably real. He suggested I speak with another guide, one whose tenure stretched back further. He led me to a small shed near the barn, where an older man, weathered face shaded by a straw hat, was methodically sweeping the threshold. Introductions made, I relayed the events of the previous night. The older man listened intently, leaning the broom against the weathered wood when I finished. People had described that apparition for years, he stated calmly. He recalled a couple terrified by tapping on their window at 2 a.m, another guest hearing footsteps on the inn's porch, but finding no one there. Descriptions varied slightly, a white gown, pale clothes, but the essence remained, a figure, seemingly female, radiating sadness or need. Her identity remained a mystery. She never threatened, only appeared lost. The rest of the morning passed as I meticulously walked the farm's perimeter, searching for any logical explanation, a hidden path to the inn, signs of a nocturnal wanderer. I found only overgrown fences, tangled briars, and faint animal trails. No fresh footprints, nothing to suggest regular human passage. Around noon, returning to the main house, the first guide offered a rare opportunity. A look upstairs, normally restricted due to structural concerns, permitted if I exercised caution. We ascended creaking stairs into a dim hallway where the floor felt unnervingly soft underfoot. He showed me a bedroom, its antique furniture draped in dust sheets, windows overlooking the fields behind the property. It was out there, he mentioned quietly, that staff sometimes spotted a pale figure, usually in the twilight hours of dawn or dusk. I confessed the visceral fear that had gripped me the night before, the pins and needles racing down my arms, the stomach plummeting dread as I peered into the darkness. I realized my hand was clamped onto the banister, knuckles stark white, mirroring my grip on the windowsill hours earlier. He nodded with quiet understanding. Back downstairs, the tour group was dispersing towards the small gift shop near the exit. Stepping into the sunlight, I watched people chatting by their cars, wondering if any of them would encounter the spectral presence tonight. A part of me considered staying, tempting fate for a second night, but the residual anxiety, the bone-deep exhaustion, argued against it. As I turned towards my car, the older man in the straw hat caught my eye and beckoned me over. "Might not help," he said, his voice low, "but if you see her again, try speaking to her. Some say she vanishes if you acknowledge her." Had anyone ever received a response? He shook his head. Fear usually paralyzed witnesses, or sent them fleeing. Still, it was a thought. I thanked him, slid into the driver's seat. A slight tremor ran through my hands as I turned the key. In the rearview mirror, the farm receded, the house paint dull under the bright sun, the barn listing slightly, the fields rippling in the breeze. My mind conjured the woman in white, the slow turn of her head, searching. A familiar tightness constricted my chest. The memory felt disturbingly tangible. I drove towards the highway, the debate about staying another night finally resolving into a firm retreat. One encounter was sufficient. The lingering tension was a burden I didn't wish to prolong. My shoulders ached, clenched tight for hours without my noticing, only relaxing as the city skyline began to emerge on the horizon. Days later, pursuing a lingering thread of unease, I phoned the farm office. Explaining I was documenting my visit, I inquired about recent similar sightings. The voice on the line confirmed it. Yes, other visitors had reported the woman in white, the disembodied voice. No explanations had surfaced. The occurrences seemed random, unpredictable, sometimes near the inn, sometimes on the farm itself. Hanging up, I felt a cold comfort. My experience was shared, validated. Yet the mystery remained absolute. No identity, no clear link to the farm's documented tragedies, only speculation, an emotional echo of past suffering, or a collective delusion born of suggestion. For me, it remains starkly real. And sometimes, drifting towards sleep, I still hear it, a faint, questioning whisper on the edge of silence. That's how it happened. Curiosity led me to a decaying farm. Guides spoke of hardship. Buildings sighed their age. Then, one night at a nearby inn, a voice called. A figure emerged from the darkness, desperate searching, before dissolving back into the night. Guides confirmed others had seen her. I left frayed, heart unsteady. Even now, recalling that night sends a chill down my spine. I see her still, a pale outline against the trees, forever caught in that searching moment, waiting. That shriek, a raw laceration of sound in the night's fabric, remains the most purely terrifying noise I have ever ingested. Not merely its volume, nor its suddenness that iced the marrow in my bones, but the awful intimacy of recognition. It was my daughter's cry, wrenched from a throat no longer nestled in the sleeping bag beside my own. I am Elias. What began as sun-dappled family escapism, a simple foray into the wild embrace of Somberwood Reach, devolved in a heartbeat into the primal dread every parent carries buried deep. Clara, my wife, and I had ferried our children, Lyra, 8 years bright, and Finn, barely 6, to this place for a weekend steeped in pine scent and starlight. The day had unfolded like a cherished photograph. Trails conquered, fish coaxed from cool water, marshmallows achieving golden perfection over crackling embers. Perfection, absolute and fragile, until it shattered. The cry jolted me from slumber's depths. My hands scrabbled, desperate for the torch, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, echoing in my throat. Its beam sliced the tent's interior, illuminating Clara already wrestling with the zipper, her face a sculpted mask of alarm. "Lyra!" My voice, thick with sleep and a burgeoning terror, scraped the air. "Lyra, where are you?" Silence answered, profound and unsettling, the specific hush of a forest holding its breath. I tumbled out after Clara, stumbling over Finn, who was blinking awake, drawn into the vortex of our panic. "Stay put, little man," I managed, striving for a calm I didn't possess. "We'll be right back." Outside, the campsite lay under a wash of spectral moonlight, deceptively normal. The glowing embers of our fire sighed smoke. The cooler stood sentinel. The children's bicycles leaned companionably against an ancient pine. But Lyra's sleeping bag, the one she'd begged to place just beyond the canvas flap, yearning to sleep directly beneath the celestial sprawl, lay violated, empty. Clara was already at the campsite's edge, her torch beam interrogating the dense tree line. "Lyra!" Her voice fractured. "Lyra, please answer!" I joined her, my own light cutting a nervous swathe through the gloom. Trees loomed, immense and watchful, their branches weaving intricate, shifting shadow plays on the forest floor. Each rustle, every twig snap, sent jolts through my system. "We have to cover more ground," I urged, forcing logic through the fog of rising panic. "You head that way, I'll go this way. Shout if anything." Clara nodded, her face bleached by the moon, and veered left. I plunged right into the waiting maw of the woods, calling Lyra's name into the unresponsive darkness. The forest seemed to absorb the sound, the immense silence pressing in. Roots snagged my feet. Stones threatened my balance. The torch beam jittered wildly with my frantic pace. My mind became a gallery of horrors. Sleepwalking? An animal? Or something else? Something unnameable? How long I thrashed through the undergrowth, I cannot say. Time dissolved, stretching and contracting like taffy. My throat burned raw from shouting. My legs screamed with the strain of the uneven terrain. Stopping was inconceivable. My daughter, my Lyra, was lost in this immensity, frightened and alone. Then cutting through the trees, Clara's voice. "Elias! Elias, quickly!" I ran, heedless of branches whipping my face, bursting into a small moon-drenched clearing. Clara knelt there, illuminated, cradling something small and familiar. As I drew closer, recognition hit like a physical blow. Lyra's beloved rabbit, threadbare from years of affection, clutched in Clara's trembling hands. "She never goes anywhere without him," Clara whispered, her voice frayed. "Elias, what is happening?" I knelt beside her, taking the stuffed toy. It felt wrong, grubby, faintly damp, as though it had lain discarded on the forest floor. A glacial dread snaked down my spine. Lyra hadn't merely wandered, she had been taken. As if summoned by the thought, a sharp crack echoed from the darkness rimming the clearing. We spun in unison, torch beams slashing the tree line. "Who's there?" I demanded, the sound thin and reedy, a poor imitation of courage. A beat of breathless silence. Then I saw them, twin points of light reflecting our beams, impossibly high for any common woodland creature. As my horror-struck gaze held, more pairs materialized, glowing embers in the dark. They were encircling us. Clara's fingers dug into my arm. "Elias," she breathed. "What are those things?" Before thought could form into an answer, one of the figures detached itself from the shadows and stepped into the clearing's pale light. Its form was disturbingly anthropomorphic, yet its motion was utterly alien, too fluid, too sinuous, fundamentally wrong. Every instinct shrieked, "Run!" but my feet felt rooted. These beings had Lyra. I knew it with chilling certainty. Leaving without her was not an option. "Where is my daughter?" The question emerged from my throat, surprisingly steady. The creature inclined its head, a gesture unnervingly human, and then it spoke, its voice a dry rustling, like wind through dead leaves or the creak of ancient boughs, barely coalescing into recognizable words. "The small one," it rasped, "is unharmed, for the moment." Beside me, Clara emitted a strangled sob. I squeezed her hand, anchoring myself to her presence. "What do you want?" I asked. Why her? The lead creature drifted closer, its brethren remaining a silent, watchful perimeter. Now I could see it more clearly. Skin like gnarled bark, limbs elongated and jointed at unnatural angles. Its face, a terrifying tableau of knots and whorls, held those luminous eyes sunk deep within hollow sockets. "We are the Deep Woods Wardens," it stated, the sound like shifting stones. "For ages untold, we have guarded this place against the careless incursions of your kind. You have forgotten the deference owed, the respect." I swallowed, the reality of the situation struggling against disbelief. Hallucination? Panic-induced phantasm? But the weight of Lyra's rabbit in my hand was undeniable, solid. "We intended no disrespect," I offered carefully. "We are only a family, seeking quiet. Please just return our daughter." A sound emanated from the creature, a dry susurrus that might have been laughter. Intent is a fragile shield. The wood demands equilibrium. A life traded for the myriad lives your kind extinguish without thought. The blood turned to ice water in my veins. Keep her? Sacrifice? The notion was a physical blow. "No," I heard myself say, the word imbued with a ferocity that surprised me. "You cannot have her. Take me." Clara gasped, a sharp intake of breath beside me, but the words tumbled out unstoppable. "I am the father. I brought them here. The responsibility is mine. If a price must be paid, let it be me." The creature regarded me, its strange head tilted, silent for a long, stretched moment. Then, impossibly, it seemed to nod. "Your offer holds weight," it rasped. "Accepted. The small one shall be returned. You will come with us." A wave of dizzying relief washed over me, immediately chased by profound fear. I turned to Clara, saw the naked terror and anguish warring in her eyes. "I have to," I whispered, the words thick. "Get Lyra and Finn away from here. Don't look back. Never come back." She shook her head, tears carving paths through the grime on her cheeks. "Elias, no! There must be another way." But the finality hung in the air between us, heavy and absolute. I pulled her close, a desperate, fierce kiss. "I love you," I breathed against her hair. "Tell the children, tell them I love them." Before resolve could crumble, I faced the bark-skinned guardian again. "I am ready." As if orchestrated, Lyra stumbled from the trees on the far side of the clearing, blinking, appearing dazed but whole. Clara flew to her, enveloping her in a fierce embrace. I allowed myself one final searing look at my family. Clara's gaze met mine over Lyra's head, a silent scream of love and loss. Then the creatures closed in, their woody forms pressing near, guiding me away, deeper into the ancient timber. I heard Clara's fading voice trying to explain to a bewildered Lyra that Daddy had to go away for a little while. My heart fractured, yet the choice felt clean, necessary. The forest enfolded us, the darkness thickening with every step. I had no concept of what awaited, what toll would be exacted, but my family was safe. That knowledge was my shield. As we moved deeper into the unknown, the creature that had brokered the exchange moved alongside me. Few of your kind demonstrate such willingness. it whispered, the sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. Perhaps hope is not entirely extinguished. I offered no reply. What words could encompass the terror, the aching void of loss already blooming within me, the searing rage at the injustice? Silence felt more honest. I walked onward, leaving the known world behind, stepping across a threshold into a realm governed by forgotten pacts and primal forces. The forest had claimed its due, and I had paid. Whatever lay ahead, I would meet it, sustained by the knowledge of their safety. And as the last echoes of the human world dissolved behind me, a strange thought surfaced. This was not merely a father's sacrifice. It felt like the beginning of something else, a tentative bridge thrown across the chasm separating two worlds long estranged. Perhaps improbably, there was purpose woven into this terrifying tapestry. Anchored by that fragile notion, I walked on into the whispering heart of Somberwood Reach. The first time the car keys materialized beside the milk cartons, slick with condensation in the refrigerator's pale light, I dismissed it as a brain fog anomaly, a momentary lapse in the mundane ballet of routine. Laughter, slightly strained, covered the flicker of unease. But when my grandmother, Genevieve's locket, a treasured gold filigree heart, surfaced amidst the breakfast flakes in a cereal box, the laughter died, replaced by the chilling certainty that my home had become host to something far more insidious than mere forgetfulness. It began subtly, woven into the fabric of my already somewhat scattered existence. Misplacing things was hardly novel. My thoughts often drifted, leaving physical objects marooned in odd locations. So, discovering my phone nestled amongst towels in the bathroom cabinet one morning elicited only a self-deprecating sigh. Another day, another mental detour. Yet, as weeks bled into one another, these instances multiplied, their nature twisting from commonplace absent-mindedness into the realm of the bizarre. My wristwatch submerged itself in the flour canister. A pair of pearl studs, consciously placed on the bedside table the night before, reappeared deep within the pocket of a winter coat dormant since March. My laptop, my digital anchor, always moored to the desk, somehow navigated its way into the cedar-scented darkness of the linen closet. Initially, rationalization was my refuge. Perhaps stress, unseen and unfelt, was piloting my limbs, causing me to stow belongings with no conscious command. I took to littering the apartment with sticky notes, fluorescent reminders of intention, striving for a deliberate mindfulness. It was futile. The locket incident shattered that fragile shield of logic. Genevieve's locket wasn't just jewelry. It was a tangible link, kept reverently in a velvet box upon my dresser, worn only for moments demanding remembrance. That morning, the spoon paused mid-air, the familiar crunch of cereal interrupted by an alien clink. There it lay, gold against the processed grain, an absolute impossibility. I hadn't touched it in weeks. A glacial cold bloomed in my stomach. This wasn't stress. This wasn't distraction. Something else, something inexplicable, was unfolding within these walls. A meticulous log became my companion. Item, original location, discovered location, date. The pattern, if such chaos could claim one, was a tapestry of pure randomness. A half-read novel materialized in the freezer, its pages stiffening with frost. My toothbrush sprouted unnaturally from the soil of a potted fern. The spare house key, always sequestered in a specific kitchen drawer, was found dangling like a strange fruit from the shower head. Sleep fractured, then fled. Nights were spent taut in the darkness, ears straining for the telltale scrape or click of displaced objects. Daylight hours dissolved into a jittery haze of checking, rechecking, a constant, anxious inventory of my possessions. Security cameras were installed, silent plastic eyes aimed at hallways and living spaces. The footage yielded nothing but frustration. Objects vanished from one frame and reappeared in another, defying transit, mocking the very notion of physical movement. Desperation gnawed. I confided in Chloe, my voice thin and reedy, recounting weeks of mounting paranoia and fractured sleep. She listened, her expression a careful blend of sympathy and concern. When my story trailed off into exhausted silence, she paused. "Ilara," she began gently, "have you ever thought that maybe you're doing this?" The question hung in the air, nonsensical. "What do you mean?" She spoke of dissociative states, of actions performed in a fugue, entirely erased from conscious memory, often triggered by buried stress or trauma. The suggestion felt like an accusation, an impossibility I instinctively recoiled from, yet a treacherous sliver of doubt lodged itself within me. Could my own mind be the architect of this domestic haunting? Was I fragmenting? Uncertainty warred with fear. I sought professional counsel. A psychiatrist, her face a mask of professional neutrality, absorbed my narrative, interjecting with precise inquiries about stress, sleep architecture, familial mental health history. Her assessment remained equivocal. Dissociative disorder wasn't dismissed, yet neither was it embraced as the definitive answer. She prescribed medication to quell the anxiety, urged the continuation of my detailed journal, and sent me back into the bewildering landscape of my life. The pills coaxed sleep, but the phenomenon persisted, even escalating. I'd wake to find my running shoes inexplicably soaking in the bathtub, or discover my entire collection of pens arranged in a precise, unnerving circle on the kitchen tiles. My own home felt alien, each room a potential stage for the next inexplicable rearrangement. Hours evaporated in frantic searches for keys, wallets, vital papers, only to unearth them in locations defying all reason. The relentless confusion and simmering fear exacted their toll. Weight slipped away, appetite vanished. Bruised crescents bloomed beneath my eyes, stark evidence of nights spent listening to the silent, busy house. Concern radiated from friends, from family. Offers were extended. Come stay, escape the locus of this strangeness. But a stubborn refusal took root. Leaving felt like surrender, like missing the crucial moment of revelation. Instead, my vigilance intensified. More cameras, motion sensors, a fine dusting of flour across thresholds, hoping to capture spectral footprints. Each measure proved laughably inadequate. The flour lay undisturbed, sensors remained silent, yet the impossible choreography continued unabated. Then came the night, roughly 3 months into this pervasive strangeness, when I awoke not to a sound, but to a profound shift in the quiet. A palpable tension hummed in the air. Heart hammering against my ribs, I crept from bed towards the living room. The sight that met my eyes obliterated the boundaries of known reality. Every movable object, books, cushions, the heavy oak coffee table, framed photographs, everything, hovered silently, suspended 3 feet above the carpet. As I stood, frozen, breath caught in my throat, they began a slow, synchronized rotation, caught in an invisible, silent vortex. My mind scrabbled, failing to reconcile the impossible vision with the immutable laws of physics. As abruptly as it commenced, it ceased. Objects plummeted back to their rightful places with a cacophony of thuds, clatters, and soft landings. By the time my trembling fingers found the light switch, the room presented an image of perfect normalcy, albeit slightly askew. I collapsed onto the rug, limbs refusing to bear my weight. A dream? Hallucination? Or had I finally glimpsed the puppeteer? The ensuing days were a pendulum swing between unwavering conviction and corrosive self-doubt. I trawled the digital depths, seeking echoes of my experience in forums dedicated to the paranormal. Some accounts resonated with chilling familiarity, others seemed ludicrous flights of fancy, even measured against my own impossible reality. The idea of inviting mediums or investigators surfaced, yet I hesitated, deterred by the fear of ridicule, or perhaps a deeper anxiety about what they might genuinely uncover. Slowly, imperceptibly, as weeks unfurled into months, a peculiar equilibrium began to establish itself. The object migrations continued, but the terror they induced gradually softened, replaced by an odd, almost academic curiosity. Where would the salt shaker appear next? What cryptic message, if any, was conveyed by the teaspoon balanced atop the lampshade? I started leaving small tokens, buttons, coins, colorful paper clips, like offerings on an altar to the unseen. Sometimes they vanished, reappearing days later in new, unexpected locations. Other times, they were arranged into intricate, baffling patterns on the floorboards. My friend's concern eased as my fear transmuted into a kind of wry bemusement. Jokes about my resident poltergeist, or mischievous house fae, became commonplace. A definitive explanation never materialized. The phenomenon eventually waned, fading out as mysteriously as it had infiltrated my life. Yet its passage left an indelible imprint. To this day, a heightened awareness attends the placement of my belongings. A part of me remains braced for them to embark on unscripted journeys. A habit formed. I speak to the house now, quiet acknowledgements whispered into the stillness. A word of thanks when keys are found where they were left. A rueful chuckle when the remote control turns up inside a shoebox. Ultimately, I've reframed those bewildering months not as an ordeal of fear, but as a stark confrontation with the vastness of the unknown. Mysteries permeate existence. Forces operate beyond our current lexicon of understanding. Sometimes, these enigmas choose to manifest not in celestial fireworks, but in the quiet absurdity of car keys in a cold compartment, or a beloved locket nestled amongst cornflakes. We choose whether to meet the inexplicable with terror, or to weave it into the strange, wonderful, perplexing fabric of being. I find I prefer the weird. Life holds far more texture that way. It began as a stain upon the image, an imperfection almost lost on the horizon, then a murky aberration lurking at the periphery. But photograph by photograph, the presence sharpened, advanced, coalesced. Before the dread fully crystallized in my mind, before I grasped the trajectory, the thing had bled from the captured light and stepped into the breathing world. Clara's nuptials unfolded under a sky of impossible azure, a day so flawlessly rendered it felt curated. Appointed the unofficial chronicler, I drifted through the celebration, my lens snaring candid bursts of laughter, the liquid gold of champagne in flutes, the ephemeral choreography of joy. Hundreds of moments committed to the memory card, acquaintances locked in effervescent conversation, my sister and her new husband entwined in their first dance's hesitant grace, the petal-strewn path where the flower girl pirouetted like a charmed sprite. Later, bathed in the sterile glow of the monitor, scrolling through the day's yield, an anomaly snagged my attention. There, nestled deep within a group portrait, partially veiled by an extravagant spray of lilies, resided a dark, vaguely anthropomorphic silhouette, unresolved, indistinct, like motion blur ghosting a static scene. Yet something felt intrinsically wrong. The proportions skewed unnaturally, the outline possessing a serrated sharpness inconsistent with shadow or movement. Magnification only fractured it further, pixelating the enigma into digital noise. A trick of the optics, I reasoned. Perhaps an interloper slipping past at the precise instant the shutter sighed. I dismissed it. But the stain persisted. Again, and then again. As I navigated the sequence of images, the shape materialized with unsettling regularity, a persistent presence haunting the backgrounds, sometimes a mere sliver of darkness clinging to the frame's edge, other times bolder, a lurking form behind the oblivious revelers, fractured by foreground elements. A glacial tremor traced my spine. The effigy, I realized with dawning horror, seemed to gain substance, to clarify, with each successive capture. In the early ceremony shots, it was nebulous, barely suggestion. By the time the digital reel reached the reception's crescendo, hints of structure emerged. A cranial curve, the slope of shoulders, rudimentary limbs. Delusion, I insisted. Fatigue blurring perception, the late hour conjuring phantoms. I sealed the laptop, seeking refuge in sleep, resolving to confront the images under the rational scrutiny of morning. Sleep, however, proved a shallow shore I couldn't reach. Each time my eyelids fell, the shapes surged into the darkness behind them, sharpening, drawing nearer with every phantom click of an imaginary shutter. When consciousness finally frayed, my dreams became a labyrinth of occluded figures, perpetually flanking my vision, their unseen gaze a constant pressure. With palpable trepidation, I approached the laptop the following dawn. A desperate corner of my mind prayed for daylight's absolution, hoping the spectral intruder would resolve into mundane coincidence, a tapestry of shadows misread. The hope shattered. The presence remained, starker now, more defined than my frayed memory allowed. Within the later photographs, distinct features clawed their way into visibility. Ocular voids sunk deep into the suggestion of a face, a slash that mimicked a mouth, digits elongated into desiccated talons. My hands trembled, clicking through the gallery. Frame by frame, the effigy advanced, its focus tightening, pushing through the fabric of the scene, shouldering aside the radiant, unaware guests. It was migrating, deliberately, towards the foreground. The final photograph transmitted a shock that nearly stilled my pulse. A portrait of Clara, luminous in her gown, crystal glass raised in a toast, and there, anchored directly behind her, the figure stood fully realized. its visage a grotesque parody of human structure. One skeletal hand extended, its needle-like fingers hovering mere millimeters from my sister's shoulder. I slammed the laptop shut, breath seizing in ragged, panicked bursts. Impossible. Photographs were static archives, not mutable realities. Shadowy forms didn't quicken into existence, didn't stalk the subjects, frozen within their frames. Yet the evidence burned behind my retinas. An icy certainty permeated me. This intrusion was merely the overture. Weeks bled into a paranoid obsession. The wedding album became my grim text, hours dissolving into fruitless analysis, frantic searches for explanations, photographic flaws, psychological phenomena, folklore whispers of image-bound entities. Nothing resonated. Instead, the contamination spread. The figure began to manifest in other captured moments, leaching into archived holiday snaps, casual phone captures with friends, even ghosting the edges of old studio portraits, always relegated to the background initially, but always inexorably advancing. I ceased taking pictures. Black tape suffocated my phone's lens. Every framed photograph vanished from my apartment walls. Futile gestures, new images materialized on my devices. Spectral photographs I possessed no memory of taking, depicting the effigy within my own home, lurking in my workspace, standing sentinel behind my sleeping form. Concern radiated from friends, from family. My attempts to articulate the encroaching horror sounded like ravings. Stress, they suggested gently. Sleep deprivation. Perhaps a displaced grief over Clara's post-wedding departure. They peered at the photos I presented, their eyes seeing only normalcy, finding no lurking dread, no tenebrous stalker. My own sanity frayed at the edges. Was this a fabrication of a fractured mind? A complete psychotic break? Yet, just as I'd coaxed myself towards that fragile belief, the evidence would reassert itself. A flicker of impossible motion in a polished surface. A shadow stretching counter to the light. The prickling certainty of being watched in solitude. The culmination arrived one night, navigating the deserted streets after a late shift. The city exhaled emptiness, my footsteps the sole percussion on the pavement. Passing a darkened storefront, its glass a black mirror, I saw it. No longer confined to emulsion or pixel, but reflected with chilling clarity. The effigy standing directly behind me. I whirled around, heart hammering against my ribs. The street yawned, vacant, but turning back to the window, it remained. Closer now, close enough to discern the texture of its surface, like crazed enamel. Close enough to witness the void sockets where eyes should be. The lipless mouth stretching into a silent, abyssal scream. I ran. A primal flight, lungs scorching, legs threatening dissolution. I didn't cease until the deadbolt slid home in my apartment, every light blazing against the encroaching dark. My body huddled into a corner, but the sanctuary felt porous, fragile. I could sense its presence intensifying, thickening the air. It had traversed the liminal boundary, migrating from image to substance. There was no longer anywhere to retreat. As I sat there, trembling, awaiting the inevitable, my phone chimed. A new photo notification. Hands shaken violently, I unlocked the screen. It displayed me, captured seconds ago, huddled in this very corner. And there, bleeding out from the shadows behind, the effigy unfurled, its hand outstretched, the porcelain tips inches from my shoulder. I didn't turn. I couldn't. In that final, lucid moment, I understood. The pursuit wasn't merely spatial, but temporal, threaded through every captured instance of my existence. Now finally, it had reached the present tense. The cold seeped through my shirt, the unmistakable touch of glazed, inanimate fingers landing on my shoulder. A last, detached thought flickered. Would anyone notice its presence in the photographs they'd inevitably take of this empty room? Then the light extinguished, and the final exposure was complete. Even now, a peculiar tremor runs beneath my skin when memory summons the night the world tilted on its axis. Rationality is my compass, fear a seldom visited shore, yet this edifice, steeped in its own peculiar gravity, burrows deep. Mostly, it wears a shroud of quietude, a silence so profound it borders on the unnatural. Solitude being my preference, this hush initially felt like sanctuary, but then commenced the aberrant whispers from the dwelling beside mine, disturbances I could no longer relegate to shadow. 6 months I've resided within these walls. The allure was modest rent, adequate space. The construction is solid, thick partitions, soaring ceilings, though the corridor luminaries possess a disconcerting habit of sputtering. My fellow occupants are phantoms, glimpsed fleetingly with burdens of groceries or haste in their strides. Doors remain resolutely shut. Voices are murmurs swallowed by the architecture. An enclave of mutual disregard. Ideal, I once thought. Adjacent to my own door, to the right along the dim hallway, lies the apartment in question. Its entrance, indistinguishable from the others save for paint flaking near the threshold like old scabs, presents an off-white anonymity. A peephole punctuates the wood, yet it's perpetually blinded from within. My attempts to penetrate its gaze have yielded only impenetrable darkness, an assumption formed, perhaps a tenant tethered to nocturnal labors, slipping in and out during the void hours. Yet no soul ever crossed its threshold in my sight. Then arose the discrepancies, small fissures in the logic. Sometimes, plunged in the deepest wells of night, a frail luminescence would leak from beneath the drawn curtains. This was the inaugural fracture in normalcy, for the apartment radiated vacancy. The blinds, typically clamped tight, betrayed a sliver at the edge, permitting this thin blade of light. A recluse, I reasoned, one allergic to daylight. But the silence persisted. Absolute. No footfalls, no conversation, no electronic hum. Only that transient glow, vanishing moments after its appearance. One night, the clock hands nearing 2, music breathed through the intervening wall. Soft, languid jazz notes, insinuating themselves into the stillness. I sat reading, ensconced in my living area, when the melody drifted across. It was ephemeral, perhaps 15, 20 seconds at most, then silence reclaimed its dominion. Pressing my ear to the plaster, I strained for any residual vibration, but the void held fast. The following day, pausing in the hallway, I listened intently at their door. Nothing. A rap of knuckles felt tempting yet profoundly unsettling. Intrusion felt wrong. I retreated. Several nights later, the music returned, this time closer to midnight. My bedroom wall, I believe, abuts their primary living space. The jazz, clearer now, slightly amplified yet still restrained, lingered longer than before. I moved to my window, scanning the street below for an external source, emptiness. Then, shifting my gaze across the narrow divide to my neighbor's window, I perceived the curtains slightly agape. A dim, warm radiance pulsed within. For a beat, I watched, searching for movement. And then I saw him, tall, clad in somber hues, a dark, long-sleeved shirt, dark trousers. He stood with his back to the window, facing what appeared to be a mirror perched on a dresser or table against the far wall. A simple act of vanity, I surmised, until a detail snagged my attention, tightening a cold fist around my gut. His reflection was disobedient. The man's shoulders rose, a visible intake of breath, yet the mirrored figure remained static. His right hand ascended towards his face, wiping sweat, rubbing his jaw, while the reflection's hand stayed stubbornly at its side. A sudden, icy current surged through my limbs. Disbelief warred with sight. I blinked repeatedly, trying to dispel the illusion, seeking rational explanations. A second person obscured, a trick of warped glass, but the reflection was his perfect double. Identical stature, build, attire, except it refused to mimic. And then its head turned. I became stone. The reflection's face pivoted, gazing directly out the window. It felt aimed, laser-focused, at me, though the man himself hadn't shifted his posture an inch. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. A dull ache bloomed low in my stomach. Motionless I stood, pinned by the sheer impossibility, terrified to break the tableau. The reflection's stare felt like a physical touch, invasive, knowing. A primal urge to wave, to shout, withered in my constricted throat. The man remained oblivious, facing the glass. His duplicate, however, continued its unnerving scrutiny. Then the reflection's mouth stretched. A smile, words forming. A soft, desiccated creak emanated from beyond the wall, simultaneous with the light's abrupt extinction. The window became a black rectangle. The music ceased, severed mid-note. I lingered, staring into that obsidian void, breath coming in ragged gasps. Sweat beaded on my brow. A fine tremor agitated my hands. Retreating, I sank onto the edge of my bed, the floor seeming miles below. For a long stretch, my gaze remained fixed on the floorboards, my mind frantically constructing, then demolishing, logical frameworks. Sleep was a distant country that night. Come morning, I made straight for the building superintendent's office. Mr. Petrov, a man slightly weathered by time but generally amiable, listened with a perplexed frown as I recounted the strange occurrences next door. His response floored me. The apartment had stood vacant for years. Had a new tenant moved in unbeknownst to him? Could someone possess a spare key? No, he insisted, showing me dusty ledgers confirming the last occupancy ended half a decade prior. The owner had attempted a sale, failed, and left it dormant. He offered to accompany me to inspect the door. Upstairs, his knock echoed unanswered. The master key slid into the lock but refused the final turn, meeting solid resistance. Unwilling to force entry without the owner's explicit consent, he offered apologies and a promise to investigate further. I returned to my rooms, frustration mingling with a rising tide of unease. The lights, the music, the figure at the mirror, these were not figments. That evening, I sought refuge in routine. Television, a microwaved meal, bed around 11. but sleep remained elusive. Every creak in the corridor, every sigh of the old building sent jolts through my nervous system. My senses strained, anticipating the slightest signal from the adjacent void. Near midnight, a soft thump resonated against the shared wall, subtle like a palm pressed flat or a shoulder leaning heavily. I rose, switched on a small lamp, its glow feeble against the shadows, and stood sentinel by the wall. Ear pressed close, I detected a faint, abrasive scritching, like fabric dragged across drywall. Then, the jazz returned, barely audible, a ghostly whisper. My chest constricted. Stepping back, I fumbled for my phone, the impulse to call Petrov warring with the late hour, and a creeping sense of absurdity. The music ebbed away after mere moments. Compelled, I approached my window once more. No light emanated from the neighboring apartment. It was utterly dark. I stared at the closed curtain, feeling the frantic pulse in my own veins. Then, a single, sharp line of light bisected the darkness. A lamp, perhaps, or an overhead fixture, its source unclear, casting a sickly illumination. The curtain remained mostly drawn, but the gap was sufficient. Keeping my own form shielded by the window frame, I peered cautiously. A fragment of him reappeared, same position near the presumed mirror. This time, only his upper torso and shoulders were visible. His right arm moved with deliberate slowness, as if retrieving an object from the unseen table. His face remained hidden. A heartbeat later, the reflection enacted a wholly separate choreography, leaning forward, craning as if to scrutinize the glass itself. My mouth turned to parchment. Pins and needles prickled my extremities. The same horrifying dissonance of movement. Then the reflection swiveled its head toward the window again, pausing, its posture suggesting a deliberate scan of the exterior darkness. I ducked instinctively, heart clawing at my throat, breath accelerating to a panicked flutter. Risking a fractional glance over the sill, I saw the reflection's head still oriented my way, while the corporeal man seemed fixed on the mirror. The disconnect defied comprehension. Abruptly, the reflection raised an arm, its index finger extending, pointing unequivocally towards me. My body locked, seized by an invisible force. My legs buckled. I staggered backward, colliding sharply with a stack of magazines near my desk. Pain flared in my elbow as I struck the table's corner, a hissed intake of breath escaping me. When I dared look again, the window opposite was black, the light extinguished. The remainder of the night unfolded on my couch, the television murmuring on low volume, a flimsy shield against the encroaching silence. Periodic glances towards the window revealed nothing, yet the expectation of that eerie glow, that watchful silhouette, never fully subsided. Morning brought Mr. Petrov changing a bulb in the corridor. I intercepted him, urgently relaying the previous night's events, the music, the figure, the pointing reflection. Describing the discordant mirror image felt ludicrous even as the words left my mouth. Petrov appeared baffled, tinged with concern. He was awaiting the owner's callback, he explained. Permission granted, he would open the unit. Could I be present? He acquiesced with a shrug, cautioning me against interference. For days I averted my gaze from that section of the building. The music surfaced once more, late, spectral, but I resisted the pull of the window. Answers were imminent, I told myself. Petrov would unlock the mystery, revealing perhaps faulty wiring, evidence of a transient squatter. maybe antique speakers set on a timer. Any mundane explanation became a lifeline. Finally, on a Tuesday morning, Petrov's knock sounded. Keys jangled in his hand. The owner had consented. We stood before the neighboring door. He inserted the master key. This time, the lock yielded. The door swung inward an inch, then stopped, obstructed. Petrov applied pressure. It scraped open, revealing a small barricade of aged cardboard boxes. Dust motes danced violently in the disturbed air, triggering a sneeze. Inside, the apartment breathed dereliction. Stale air hung heavy. Cracked hardwood floors lay bare beneath layers of grime. We traversed the living space, seeking any sign of recent habitation. Nothing. No furniture, save a single dust-shrouded table relegated to a corner. No chairs, no sofa, no bed in the sleeping quarters. Kitchen cupboards gaped empty. Water stains mapped the walls like faded continents. Petrov wrestled open the blinds, admitting weak daylight. My eyes scanned frantically for a mirror. None existed. The knot in my stomach cinched tighter. The apartment was precisely as Petrov had claimed. Utterly vacant. No bedding, no clothing, no electronics. The sole anomaly was a faint, lingering scent near one corner of the living room. Something akin to old, faded cologne. I drifted to the window facing my own. Its curtain, thick and coated in filth, sagged, half detached from its rod. Pulling it fully aside, the perspective aligned perfectly with my bedroom window opposite. I pictured myself standing there, observing. My gaze fixed on the corner where the tall man had stood. No mirror, no table. Nothing but faint, dusty footprints. Ours. Ancient. Impossible to discern. Petrov muttered something about the tricks old buildings play on the eyes, shrugged and departed. I lingered, exploring the other rooms, desperate for a clue. A shard of explanation for the lights, the music, the impossible figure. I found only emptiness. Returning to my own apartment, a profound unease settled over me, coupled with exhaustion. Routine felt hollow here. The ghost of that jazz melody haunted the periphery of my hearing. Relief warred with a deeper, more insidious disturbance. If no one resided there. What alawaran had I witnessed? That night, bracing myself, I approached my window near 11. The adjacent apartment remained dark. The curtain, left open after our inspection, revealed only the shadowed interior across the narrow chasm. A fragile calm began to settle. Perhaps the intrusion, the inspection, had broken the spell. As I started to turn away, a light flickered into existence within that vacant room. Unmistakable. No lamp, no fixture existed there hours ago, yet a dim pulse emanated, like a dying bulb or shielded candlelight. My heart hammered anew. I forced myself to remain, to watch. The air in my room felt suddenly glacial against my skin. My neck grew rigid. A tall silhouette materialized, partially eclipsing the faint radiance. The exact profile. Broad shoulders, long limbs, the familiar outline. Positioned near the corner, the very spot confirmed empty that morning. My breath hitched. I waited, suspended. A moment later, the figure turned just enough for its profile to become distinct against the glow. Details remained elusive, only the general contour, yet its orientation was undeniable. It faced my window. I couldn't discern eyes, but I felt its gaze, a palpable weight. The fine hairs on my arms lifted. My legs threatened to betray me. My hand sought my phone, not to call, but merely to hold, a useless talisman. The silhouette stepped laterally, gliding towards the window, not closer, but parallel to it. Then it paused. The music began again, faint, threaded with static, like a warped vinyl record turning on an ancient machine. My heart slammed against my ribs. I was incapable of looking away. The figure slowly, deliberately, raised an arm, pointed, directly at me. It saw me. I recoiled, stumbling backward. My phone slipped from my grasp, clattering onto the floor. When my gaze snapped back to the window, darkness reigned. The light opposite was gone. The silhouette had vanished. The music had ceased. Only silence remained, profound and absolute. I stood rooted, the frantic thrumming in my temples the only sound, staring at that empty, accusing window for what felt like an eternity, but was likely mere minutes. How? After what we'd found, or failed to find, that very day. Now, recounting this, sitting here in the uncertain light, answers remain elusive. Mr. Petrov maintains the apartment's vacancy with unwavering conviction. No official explanation has surfaced. I haven't ventured back inside. I consciously avoid passing that door after dusk. Moving feels like the only sane option, yet finances bind me here, and a desperate fragment of my mind still clings to the hope of a rational, overlooked explanation. But the memory of that reflection turning, that figure pointing, it defies dismissal. Impossible, yet witnessed. Sleep offers little respite. In the quiet hours, the phantom strains of jazz return, or I see that sickly glow seeping through the curtains of my mind's eye. Sometimes I awaken slick with sweat, utterly convinced that something stands just beyond the wall, listening. Yet, when courage permits a check, there is only darkness, and sometimes that darkness feels intensely, terribly aware. The line between reality and illusion has blurred, but I know what I saw. I know what I continue to hear, regardless of disbelief. I cannot unknow it. Something resides in that empty space, and it refuses to be ignored. The most terrifying part? I don't believe I can ignore it any longer. Each night is a vigil, listening for the next sound, dreading the next flicker of light, utterly powerless to make it cease. What siren call first beckoned me downward, I cannot precisely say. Perhaps it was the faintest rasp, like dry bone dragged across floorboards, or the sibilance of moribund air breathing through fissures in desiccated timber. I know only this. Against the primal counsel screaming retreat within my own skull, I find myself here, now, gazing into that tenebrous passage in the underbelly of the Emporium. This place employs me, yes, but it has never offered sanctuary. It is Mr. Blackwood's domain, a reliquary choked with the legacies and curios I've spent weeks meticulously indexing. Yet this corridor, sequestered behind a bulwark of mahogany armchairs, has always felt utterly incongruous. Its stillness is too profound, its dimensions too constricting, and some quality inherent to it makes my own skin feel alien, stretched taut over a frame ill-fitting my soul. I strain my hearing, catching something akin to an exhalation, though certainty eludes me. My torch beam dances across threadbare Persian carpets, their intricate geometries half obliterated by the passage of time and feet. The atmosphere down here is cloying, thick with dust, and underscored by a coppery pungency I fail to identify. A hand drifts to my scalp, tracing the dampness gathering at my hairline. I've confided my apprehension about this passage to no one. Blackwood would scoff, and the others, well, they are mostly ephemeral help. Youths whose transient presence precludes noticing such anomalies. My initial foray into this depth was accidental. Engaged in reorganizing a shipment of antique chronometers, I shifted a cumbersome commode and unveiled the narrow, unadorned wooden door. No lock secured it, merely a rudimentary latch. Beyond lay steps plunging downward. Just another segment of the cellar, I reasoned. Perhaps some forgotten alcove for surplus inventory. But the instant I crossed the threshold, a palpable shift occurred in the air's pressure. This corridor seemed to respire differently from the rest of the establishment. I recall sweeping my light across shelves laden with ancient grimoires, ponderous leather-clad volumes, their spines fractured, their covers embossed with esoteric sigils. I remember the stone effigies positioned at intervals along the walls, depicting visages contorted in paragons of terror, mouths agape in silent shrieks, eyes bulging, cheeks hollowed. The stone itself possessed a peculiar sheen, as if it had wept. I hurried past them, a visceral crawl prickling my flesh, convinced I heard susurrant voices conversing in tongues unknown, guttural consonants, sibilant vowels, coalescing into a substrate of lunacy. I fled that day, my heart battering my ribs with such force, I feared they might splinter. For several days, I actively suppressed the memory. I immersed myself in routine, sorting porcelain tea services, meticulously labeling silverware, dusting the vacant stairs of bisque dolls. But nocturnally, confined to the cramped lodging I rent above the shop, my thoughts invariably drifted back down to that passage, to those forbidden texts and lithic horrors. An insistence emanated from below, a summons to return. The following morning found me transfixed before the closed basement door, my pulse a frantic drum against my ears. A quick look, I promised myself, nothing more. Tucked in my pocket was a small camera. I harbored a vague hope of capturing evidence, of imposing rationality upon the inexplicable. Perhaps a maker's mark on the sculptures, a publication date within a grimoire, something concrete to dispel the unease. Upon my second ingress, the corridor seemed elongated. Whether a trick of perception or some spatial distortion, I cannot swear, but reaching the station of the first effigy required demonstrably more paces. My torchlight illuminated the familiar Persian rugs, yet they appeared subtly disturbed, their fringes now angled in orientations previously unnoticed. The grimoires, still secured by corroded hasps, exerted a silent magnetism. My hand reached for one, intent on breaching its secrets, but an abrupt whisper, intimately close to my ear, arrested my motion. I whirled, confronting only vacant air, yet the sculptures had transmuted. The one nearest, previously facing the opposing wall, now confronted me directly, its hollowed stone gaze locked onto mine. A knot tightened in my gut. I recoiled, heart hammering, and practically bolted from the passage. For the remainder of that week, I rigorously avoided the corridor. I manufactured tasks upstairs, rearranging objets d'art in the main showroom. I even undertook the tedious chore of scrubbing the front display window. At night, my bedroom door was bolted, the lamp left burning. Still, the conviction persisted. The corridor waited, imbued with a palpable sense of disappointment, as though I had violated some unspoken pact. 4 days hence, marshalling my resolve, I descended anew. This time, an unfamiliar element commanded my attention. At the corridor's furthest extremity, beyond intervening layers of rugs and shelving, stood a tall, oval mirror. I hadn't perceived it before. Its frame was wrought iron, tortured into shapes resembling arcane script. I advanced tentatively, the cone of my flashlight trembling in the ambient gloom. As I drew near enough to discern my reflection, a strangled cry nearly escaped me. My likeness was present, yet fractionally asynchronous, mirroring my movements with a minute, unnerving delay. I raised my hand. My reflection hesitated before mimicking the gesture. My breath grew shallow, a constricting band tightening around my chest. In the glass, behind my own image, I thought I glimpsed ephemeral shapes, shadowy, half-articulated figures, hunched low, their mouths forming silent, indecipherable syllables. I stumbled backward, catching my heel on a rug's edge. A hand, a tangible, solid hand, gripped my shoulder. I spun with a gasp. Nothing. I stood frozen in the charged silence, heart pounding violently, fighting nausea. The sculptures regarded me anew. The closest now bore a twisted mouth, resembling a sneer. Hesitantly, I extended a hand and touched the cold stone cheek. A film of moisture coated it, slick and repellent, making me snatch my hand back. It smelled of loam, of damp earth. The voices returned, louder now, imbued with a chilling amusement. Later, stretched taut in my bed, I replayed the sequence. My mind snagged on a small journal, discovered months prior, within an old secretaire in the main shop. Its leather cover bore a peculiar sigil. At the time, the script within, some runic alphabet, had been impenetrable. I dismissed it. Now, a chilling suspicion formed. Could this journal hold a connection to the corridor? The next morning, I retrieved it from the drawer where it lay forgotten. Examining the runes under magnification, I identified a recurring symbol matching those on the grimoire spines. An eye bisected by 2 diagonal slashes. A cold dread seeped into me. I felt observed, even here, bathed in the innocuous light of day. That evening, journal clutched in hand, I ventured into the corridor once more. Why I couldn't articulate, perhaps a desperate need for answers, for some semblance of control. The passage felt distinctly colder. My breath plumed before me in faint, transient clouds. Dust motes pirouetted in the torch's feeble radiance. I approached the first sculpture, holding the journal aloft like a dubious talisman. The whispering intensified, seeming not to emanate from any single point, but to bleed from the very walls. I advanced with deliberate slowness, each footfall amplified by the soft protest of floorboards beneath the muffling rugs. The mirror gleamed at the far end, a dark invitation. Using a letter opener, I managed to pry loose the clasp of one grimoire. Its brittle pages revealed dense arrays of symbols identical to those in the journal. My stomach clenched. Rituals, gateways. Was this corridor a conduit to some parallel existence? A dimension populated by unseen entities thriving on terror and disorientation. The susurrant voices seemed almost exultant at my dawning comprehension. They wanted me to grasp the nature of this place. Another step towards the mirror, journal in one hand, torch in the other. My reflection materialized. It stood there, head canted slightly, eyes pools of unnerving darkness, lips parted, as if poised to speak. Behind my mirrored form, I registered peripheral shifts, the sculptures, subtly repositioning, like dropped frames in deteriorating celluloid. Now all faced me directly, their mouths downturned in grim, silent accusation. The silence became oppressive, pressing against my eardrums. I heard only the frantic thudding of my own heart, each beat causing my vision to pulse. I tried to form words, a question, a demand. "Who are you? What do you want?" But my throat seized. A cough escaped, echoing with unnatural resonance. My reflection raised its hand, a beat too slow. I reached forward, intending to touch the mirror surface, to test its solidity. My fingertips never arrived. The glass seemed to shimmer, to ripple like water, disturbed by an unseen current. I recoiled, pure terror galvanizing my limbs. A presence resided within that mirror. No, behind it. I could feel its scrutiny, palpably feeding on the tension coiling in my muscles. The corridor walls seemed to press inwards. Vertigo threatened. My breathing grew shallow, ragged. If consciousness deserted me here, what fate awaited? Would I awaken in that other realm, besieged by these intangible horrors? Stumbling backward again over a treacherous rug fold, I nearly dropped the torch. The whispering escalated to a frenetic pitch, and the sculptures' faces contorted anew, mouths stretching wide in soundless agony. I managed to turn and flee, ducking low, my shoulders scraping against the laden shelves, dislodging several grimoires that thudded heavily onto the carpeted floor. I didn't cease my retreat until I burst through the door, scrambled up the stairs, and collapsed back into the relative sanity of the main store. Catching my breath felt like reclaiming stolen life. My clothes clung damply to my skin. How long I remained there, huddled behind a dusty barricade of chairs, heart galloping, eyes fixed on the mundane floorboards, I cannot say. Eventually, I secured the basement door's lock and ascended the stairs to my room. For days, sustenance became abhorrent. Food tasted of ash and regret. My own reflection, caught in the small mirror above my wash basin, seemed subtly altered. My eyes appeared more deeply set, encircled by bruised shadows. Every creak, every settling noise of the old building sent jolts of adrenaline through me. An unseen accompaniment felt certain. I considered calling a friend, but the words died before formation. There's something profoundly wrong in the cellar. Derision would be the kindest response. Last night, adrift in the liminal space preceding sleep, I perceived it. A fleeting shape in the periphery of my bedroom mirror. The vague outline of those stone effigies, peering over my shoulder, their heads oscillating in silent reproof. The click of the lamp switch banished the apparition, but left my heart hammering, the phantom taste of ancient dust coating my tongue. Today, I compelled myself downstairs, merely to verify the basement door. It remained locked, yet through the solid wood, I heard it, the whispering, scratching insistently at the borders of my awareness. I know the corridor persists, immutable yet perpetually in flux. I know that should I breach that threshold again, the sculptures will be there, their positions reconfigured, their stony contempt palpable. The mirror will wait at the terminus, a fragile membrane partitioning realities, and whatever entity observes from beyond that surface, whatever gazes out through my own distorted reflection, remains unsated, expectant, eager for my return. How much longer my resistance can endure, I truly do not know. Even now, standing amidst the familiar clutter upstairs, my silhouette captured in the glass of a display cabinet seems fractionally delayed, its eyes darker than they ought to be. The corridor's magnetism intensifies, paradoxically nourished by my own fear. I can taste the dust on my tongue. It feels gritty, like infinitesimal shards of glass, and in that final, flickering glimpse of myself in the polished surface, with those unseen, hovering shapes clinging to my shoulders, I understand with chilling certainty, nothing has concluded. It is merely waiting. The shard of reflected moonlight off steel clutched tight in his fist. That was the precise moment the floor dissolved beneath me. This wasn't some awkward encounter, another peculiar client in a vacant property. No, this was meticulously constructed, a snare, and I, Ilara Vance, had strolled obligingly into its jaws. As his gaze, chips of winter ice, snagged mine, a horrifying certainty crystallized. Escape from this hollow shell of a house was no longer a given. The day had unspooled like countless others in my decade navigating the currents of real estate. Odd requests and unsettling properties were par for the course, yet nothing had foreshadowed this precipice. Dusk was settling, bleeding purple into the office windows when the phone shrilled. A man, his voice like stones tumbling in a dry well, demanded an immediate viewing. Irregular, certainly, yet not wholly alien. Buyers, serious ones, often marched to urgent drums, and in this hungry market, opportunities weren't lightly discarded. "Forgive the hour," he rasped, impatience threading through the gravel. "But my time in town is fleeting. The old manor on Willow Lane, the Victorian, deeply interested. Your time will be compensated." Hesitation flickered. I eyed the deepening twilight beyond the glass. Past 7 already. Willow Lane, sequestered on the town's fringe, notoriously remote. Yet the siren song of a substantial commission drowned the nascent tremor of unease. "Very well," I conceded. 30 minutes. Will that suffice?" "Impeccable," he returned, a peculiar resonance beneath the surface, unreadable. "Until then." The drive out was a descent into disquiet. Willow Lane's Victorian Grande Dame had languished on the listings for months, a Gothic beauty shunned for its isolation, and the whispers, persistent, spectral, of being haunted. Daylight viewings had been few, a nocturnal visit, never. As my headlights carved through the gloom, the house materialized, looming, its windows' vacant sockets absorbing the last vestiges of sunlight. A shiver traced my spine as I killed the engine. Silence. No other vehicle disturbed the solitude. My watch confirmed my punctuality. Perhaps Mr. Thorne was delayed. Keys cold in my palm, I elected to wait near the imposing front door. 5 minutes stretched into 10, the silence amplifying the house's brooding presence. Just as I considered abandoning the venture, a silhouette detached itself from the deeper shadows flanking the porch. Tall, swathed in black, his features obscured by a hat's concealing brim. "Mr. Thorne?" I ventured, recalling the name given. He inclined his head, gliding closer. "My apologies for the tardiness, surveying the perimeter." His voice had altered, smoother now, almost silken, yet underscored by a tension that plucked at my nerves. I suppressed the instinct to recoil. Business as usual, I told myself. Just another client. A brittle smile pasted on. I turned the key. "Shall we proceed?" Inside, the air hung thick and cold. Our footfalls resonated unnervingly through the cavernous, unfurnished rooms, while the beam of my flashlight sent shadows skittering like disturbed phantoms. I launched into the familiar recitation of architectural merits, forcing enthusiasm into the void. Mr. Thorne trailed wordlessly, his impassivity a stark departure from typical buyer behavior. His silence was profound, unsettling, but I attributed it to the late hour, forging ahead. The unravelling began upstairs, in the cavernous master suite. Mid-sentence, extolling the virtues of the original parquet flooring, I sensed the void behind me. I pivoted, the flashlight beam slicing the darkness. He stood sentinel by the doorway he'd silently closed. "Mr. Thorne?" The tremor in my voice was undeniable. "Is something amiss?" A smile stretched his lips then, utterly devoid of warmth, a glacial fissure that turned my blood to slush. "Oh, entirely the contrary. Everything is precisely as it should be. Though I fear a slight misapprehension exists. You see, acquiring this property was never my intention." My pulse became a frantic drum against my ribs. I failed to grasp. Why are we here?" He advanced a single step, and the ambient gloom caught it, the lethal glint of the blade. "We are here," he murmured, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "because this is the designated place, the place for your disappearance." Raw terror seized me as the ghastly architecture of his plan slammed into place. Isolated, empty house, a predator. No one knew my exact location. A perfectly laid trap. My thoughts scrambled, desperate for an egress. The window, sealed by decades of paint and neglect, surely, and a perilous drop besides. The door, he occupied it, a dark sentinel. Retreating instinctively, my gaze locked on the knife. I stammered, "Please, this isn't necessary. I'll say nothing, just permit me to leave." His laughter, sharp and chilling, caromed off the bare walls. "Ah, but necessity dictates otherwise, I assure you. You comprehend, you are merely the latest iteration, not the terminus. Nothing personal, truly. You are simply available." Each word fell like a hammer blow as he closed the distance, a predator savoring the chase. My retreat ended abruptly against the cold plaster of the far wall, cornered. In that stark moment, staring into the abyss of his eyes, my life didn't cascade before me in cinematic montage. Instead, regret flooded the space. Regret for dismissing intuition, for venturing alone into this nocturnal desolation, for letting avarice eclipse every blaring signal. Yet, beneath the suffocating layers of fear and regret, a primal ember of defiance flared. I would not perish here, not like this. As the knife began its ascent, the world seemed to decelerate. An opening, minuscule but present. I lunged, driving my shoulder into his sternum. The unexpected force sent him staggering, surprise flickering across his features. The knife skittered across the floorboards. I surged past him, wrenching the bedroom door open, and fled. Down the grand staircase I plunged, breath tearing raggedly in my throat. Behind me, his heavier footfalls pounded in pursuit, his breathing harsh. Reaching the massive front door, panic turned my fingers into clumsy, useless things as I wrestled with a stubborn lock. Just as the mechanism yielded with a decisive click, his hand clamped onto my forearm like a vice. A scream tore from my lungs, piercing the night's oppressive stillness. I thrashed wildly, propelled by sheer survival instinct. My elbow connected with yielding flesh. His midriff and his grip faltered just enough. I ripped myself free. Into the blackness I sprinted, not risking a backward glance. My car sat mere yards away, a sanctuary shimmering in the dark. Reaching it, my hand trembled so violently I could barely guide the key into the ignition. As the engine roared to life and I slammed the gear shift into reverse, a fleeting glimpse in the rearview mirror captured him, standing motionless on the porch, a dark statue watching me escape. Gravel spat from beneath the tires as I tore down the lane. I didn't ease off the accelerator until the reassuring glow of the police station lights bloomed ahead, my heart a wild bird against my ribs, tears charting hot paths down my face. The ensuing days were a maelstrom of official statements, forensic teams combing the Victorian. Discoveries emerged from within its walls, concealed chambers, implements of unspeakable purpose, macabre tokens from previous encounters. Mr. Thorne, identified as Alistair Finch, had utilized vacant properties as his hunting grounds for years, preying on agents like me, lured by the promise of a sale into terminal isolation. 2 weeks later, attempting the same gambit in a neighboring county, he was apprehended. Confronted with his photograph for identification, an icy dread snaked down my spine. The face from my nightmares was contained, yet the psychic scar of that night remained indelible. My career in real estate ended shortly thereafter. The thought of entering another empty house, of the vulnerability inherent in meeting strangers in secluded locations, became unbearable. A decade's work incinerated in a single night of abject terror. Now, ensconced in a vibrant city neighborhood, far from isolated lanes and brooding manners, the rightness of that choice is undeniable. I am among the fortunate. I endured, and for that resurrection, gratitude is a daily quiet ritual. Sometimes a "for sale" sign catches my eye, or I observe an agent ushering clients across a threshold, and the urge rises to cry out, to warn of the shadows that can gather behind unlocked doors, of the predators who weaponize trust. But the world seldom listens to such cautionary tales. Who truly anticipates a routine showing culminating in a desperate battle for existence? So, my voice finds a different channel. I advocate for safety within the industry, speaking at forums, contributing articles, any measure to illuminate the potential dangers. Because while my narrative found its fortunate resolution, countless others did not. And if my experience can prevent even one soul from stepping unaware into the snare I so narrowly evaded, perhaps some measure of meaning can be salvaged from the wreckage of that terrifying night.